Today, I want to talk about a very interesting working paper coming out of the University of Queensland examining what happened when, due to COVID, homeless people were housed in hotels. Not only that, but it also examined a new approach of providing care, focusing on building the self-autonomy and dignity of those being cared for. What makes this research for me so interesting is that the researchers were involved from the entire duration of the experiment, conducting regular on-site visits, interviews, and examining administrative data. While there are some limitations to the research that I'll talk about later, I think it was a very holistic overview of the experiment. So, how did it work? Well, basically, the Queensland government leased out the 4-star Park Hotel in Brisbane and ran it as a homeless shelter from May 2021 to June 2022. It was run by St. Vincent's as well as regular hotel staff who continued to provide their regular cleaning services. On site, in addition, there were social workers, primary mental health care, drug and alcohol support, as well as disability support service. There was no curfew, but there was 24/7 security, and if there were issues, a resident could be removed from the hotel. So, did it work? In short, I would argue yes, but it's hard to say. Unfortunately, there are no follow-up data on the residents who participated in the program, so we don't really know what happened to them and if they were successful in obtaining long-term housing, which is the ultimate goal of the program. However, I would argue that it is difficult to not read the transcripts in some of the interviews and say that the increased dignity and safety provided to the participants was not a victory within itself. Beyond this, while on my reading it does appear that the experimental model was good at helping residents mentally and physically, it was far from a panacea, as we will explore. Although, in a sense, none of this really mattered from the program's goal of helping people obtain long-term housing, a clear through line of the paper is a significant impact that the current housing crisis had on people becoming homelessness and the extreme difficulty in acquiring a place to stay. So, who were the residents staying at the hotel? From an administrative point of view, there were 83 available rooms in the hotel. Over the course of the program, there were 276 participants who stayed. 70% were male, 30% were Indigenous, and 70% were between the ages of 35 and 54. These numbers, quite frankly, do not capture the human element in any capacity. The paper details quite a few sombering stories of people's experiences with homelessness, which I believe are important to state to begin to understand the situation. First, many homeless sleep in boarding houses, and whilst this may put a roof under one's head, they were known to be, quote, shocking, nasty places. Quote, I used to sleep on the floor while a heroin addict spilling coffee all over me with my feet up against the door because that would get kicked in every second night and you'd get robbed. Therefore, for some, it was preferable to sleep outside. However, this obviously had a significant set of issues. Being homeless exposes people to the public gaze, making their personal habits, recreation activity, addictions highly visible, which is obviously dehumanizing. Additionally, their activities, which may have been fine in the home, led to interactions with law enforcement. Quote, I racked up 17 charges in 10 months. I was on the street, and it wasn't normally me that would do that type of shit. It wasn't bad stuff. It was mainly just getting caught with drugs and that. Quote, I've been down on the ground in the gutter, getting kicked with drugs and that. Quote, even for those that may have wanted to be in some sort of boarding house or similar accommodation, there was often nothing available. Quote, Outreach asked us if we wanted to get off the street. There might be a small waiting period. A couple of months, I think, I was on the street. Still on the street, at the park, waiting. A theme that will be present throughout the entire paper is the pervasiveness of the housing crisis in Australia and how that kneecaps people who need help the most, continuously. To this point, only 12% of the people entering the hotel were coming from a flat or couch surfing arrangement. 55% were previously living in the open, and the remaining were either living in crisis accommodation or boarding houses. An appropriate quote from one of the residents stated, quote, not one single person in this building doesn't have a fucked up story. So, with that bit of context, why did COVID and the subsequent opening up of this hotel into a homeless facility create opportunity? First, for a significant portion of social workers, this new model was an opportunity to implement a new type of approach to homelessness. This is a resident-led approach, which aims to encourage autonomy and independence. Quote, you're working alongside that person, one of my managers told me. She gave me this analogy. You are driving the car with your resident, and you're sitting next to them. You're the GPS. You're helping them, but they're telling you where they want to go. Second, others were less focused on a new approach to care and more on the opportunity that providing individuals with real quality living quarters, privacy, and their own bathrooms could have on people. This experiment demonstrates an example where, despite having different goals, they complemented each other incredibly well. In this instance, the built environment was highly facilitative. Not only did the private rooms provide residents the actual space and privacy to build their own autonomy, but it backed up a person as being worth the space. As one worker commented, quote, 8 out of 10 times when I bring someone to their room, there's a tear. Yeah, they get quite teary because it is showing them respect in a nice room, and they come in and it's beautifully made up and there's a little toiletry pack there. They weren't expecting something like that. On the whole, these models worked well, but not perfectly. First, the hotel was not purposely built for this, which created some issues. Second, often staff would have to engage in activities which in some way disabled residents by taking away their autonomy, and it was a constant difficulty in finding a line between support and disablement. This ranged in severity, from the fear that 24/7 support could disable residents via support, and the periodic checking of rooms for subsistence, to the obvious limitations on autonomy in cases of breaches of the rules. An additional change which occurred over the course of the program was the emphasis on staff taking a trauma-informed approach to helping residents. A trauma-informed approach involves recognizing the impacts of trauma and recovery pathways, identifying signs of trauma, incorporating this understanding into practices, and avoiding re-traumatization. Obviously, given what we just discussed, it was a pretty important element of the plan. Strategies were shared among staff to engage with different residents and tailor practices to individual needs, acknowledging that many residents have experienced significant trauma. Language use and communication approaches were adjusted to create an environment where residents felt empowered, calm, and safe. An example of where you can see sort of the difference in practice was between local hotel staff and social support care. Quote, "We sort of had to explain how somebody who's in a point of being in a fight or flight response isn't going to be able to hear the specifics about what time they need to have their laundry out." Or, for example, when it came to inspecting room, social staff, unsurprisingly, had a much greater emphasis on, quote, "keeping a check on who needs extra assistance here and start unpacking why they need assistance here." So, what impact did these practices have? While I will go into some of the issues faced, the impact was largely positive. The park offered residents a sanctuary where the usual pressures of housing were temporarily alleviated, characterized by its flexible approach, relaxed house rules, and a team of dedicated and supported staff. This unique environment ensured that residents weren't burdened with the immediate stress of finding alternative accommodations, granting them invaluable space to recuperate, introspect, and strategize future moves. Quote, "I saw that they're helping me a great deal. I don't know where I would have been or where I'd be today if it wasn't for them." This sentiment is echoed by others. Quote, "I thought that I was going to go good, bad, good, like go homeless, good here, and then homeless again. They said, no, we've got you. Now you're here, we've got your support." The park's approach allows for residents to genuinely relax. Quote, "I can relax and recuperate a bit. You don't have to be up. You're not woken up at 7 o'clock in the morning to get out of the building and stuff." The ability to make well thought out decisions is another advantage of staying at the park. Quote, "If I was still on the streets, I would have taken the first opportunity. At least here, you can actually be a little bit picky and choosy, like what you want, which is good, because usually when you're desperate, you make desperate decisions." The main issues from the point of view of the residents were firstly drug and alcohol issues and mental health concerns. Second, violence and interpersonal conflict among residents. In terms of drug and alcohol issues, present beyond the obvious problems, it undermined other people's attempts at staying clean. Additionally, it was felt that by some residents that there was not sufficient mental health services for those with serious mental health conditions. In response, the staff at times tried to limit the amount of people entering the hotel who had substance abuse issues as to protect those recovering, and limited the intake of those with serious mental health concerns as to not overstretch resources. In terms of violence, as one resident described it, quote, "The violence, because end of the day, they're not going to be violent to you. They're violent to themselves more. Yeah, unless you've got an argument with them. That's why I say the drugs and everything, there's a lot of drama here." Often this unsurprisingly led to a breach and a potential expulsion from the hotel. Beyond these challenges, some residents, especially men, struggled to find purposeful activities and employment that would bolster their self-esteem. Although they were eager to contribute to the park and engage in meaningful tasks, they were often hamstrung by concerns around workplace health and safety requirements. Despite these challenges, the residents felt that the park service practitioners had responded appropriately to concerns raised by the residents, and outside of finding safe, affordable, and appropriate housing options, their stay at the park was mostly an improvement on their lives prior to entering. In response to these challenges, and with the privacy of the park offered, residents cultivated a variety of self-care strategies to maintain their well-being. Many have opted to be selective about their interactions, choosing to limit their time with other residents and often staying within the confines of their own rooms. Quote, "I don't associate with people because I know if I associate with the people, it's going to heighten my risk of using drugs and substances again. And no disrespect to these people, but they're not the kind of friends I want to have. You are who you surround yourself with." This approach, however, had its limitations, especially for those residents without a balcony. It obviously got a little claustrophobic at times. Creative outlets like art and music served as a therapeutic avenue for others, supporting their mental health and providing a distraction from the challenges that they face daily. Physical health also took precedent for some residents who maintain a regimen of exercise and medication. For others, the act of caring for their peers offered a profound sense of purpose and connection. Quote, "I look after people, and they're not doing it down here. They come to mine, have a coffee and a cone, and off you go." Being able to rest, plan the next steps, and engage in self-care was obviously an important aspect for the residents, and it increased their sense of autonomy and volition. One example of this is a resident who, living through a lifetime of trauma and drug addiction, used his almost 12 months at the park to make a plan for a different life that he desired. Indeed, he acknowledged the support from the staff at the park, but also his own agency. Quote, "I've been the one doing all the driving. I'm the one that's doing all the hard yards. Most of my life I've been on drugs, so I've gotten sick of it. I made myself a goal to give up the gear, to get myself clean, get myself a job, and get my life back on track, and to get back in contact with my mum and my brother." The primary structural issue was housing, or lack thereof. At the park, the overriding mission for the staff was to support residents in their quest for housing. This commitment underscores the facility's primary objective, which is a transitional medium, helping residents move away from homelessness to housing. However, this was extremely tough due to the combined factors of low amounts of social housing and the high price of rentals that were unaffordable for those primarily reliant on welfare payments. This state of limbo has led the park to be colloquially labelled as, quote, God's waiting room. Quote, "So even though they're here, can't afford anywhere else, they still have that requirement by housing to try and find somewhere which, as good as it is, it's pointless because they can't afford it. Where do you put the people where there's not enough housing?" This created a serious issues, as carers were still required to help people and to help them get into a state to be ready to move out. There were still mutual obligations on the residents to do a number of tasks. But obviously, this led to immense frustration, resulting in some people being kicked out as they did not want to continue their mutual obligations, as it did not make much sense to them. Quote, "It makes it so much harder for the people at the park who are working there because it's hard to get these customers to buy into their transition out when you can't guarantee them a transition out." Quote, "And looking at rentals all day, oh my God, it is exhausting when you're back to the start. You do it so many times. Is it available? Blah, 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 blah. You don't get a response back. When you do, you go and visit it. It's not like the pictures, and it is, wow, it's astronomical to live alone now." So, what happened to the people who stayed at the park? Unfortunately, it's hard to say, as no follow-up research was commissioned to see what the long-term impact of the park had on people. This obviously severely clouds the results. While on the whole, it was seen as quite positive, we can't tell with any certainty if it had a long-term impact. Saying that, we do have some basic administrative data. First, of the 213 people that completed a stay, the average length of that time was about 8 weeks, although there was a high length of ultra-short stays, with those staying less than 7 days being about 17%. Reasons for exiting the park vary and include residents no longer requiring assistance, 33%, the residents' needs or goals being met, 24%, withdrawal of service by the park, 15%, and loss of contact with the resident, 10%. So obviously, that's quite a high proportion of 55% of residents having their needs met or no longer requiring assistance, which is a positive sign, but we don't have the follow-up study. Several factors may explain residents' length of stay and reasons for leaving, including the transient nature of the population, engagement challenges for individuals with trauma and complex issues, and the need for crisis accommodation. Lifestyle behaviors such as drug and alcohol use could risk eviction and impact the length of stay. Not all residents wish to engage with the program, which can contribute to their departure within 3 months, as well as resident struggles, ongoing societal failures, and trauma contribute to a unique situation and impact the decisions regarding the program. So, basic conclusion, I would call it a win. I thought this research was super interesting, especially the qualitative and administrative data that was available. Unfortunately, I would love to see a follow-up study looking at where these people are now and the long-term success of the program. But on the whole, really interesting, unique research that I wanted to get out there. Thank you.